We're now looking at the interval for the Aeolian mode, which is going to be the main minor scale. So this is the big one. This is the one that we want to know well, possibly second only to the major scale in terms of how well, because we want to be able to compare the other minor modes to the main minor, which is the Aeolian mode, otherwise known as the minor scale. And we're going to be rotating around this A note, so that'll be our focal point, and then we'll measure our intervals around it. Let's do a quick recap though, so we can get the context of it and try to cram as much information in our mind as we go through our practice routines as possible. So we started up top with the idea of we're going to be in the major scale. The related major scale is the C major scale. We're looking at this position here, which you might call position 1. You might call it a G-shaped C major position if you're looking at it from a caged standpoint. If I was to start on this A note and do the 5-note pentatonic, it would sound like this. If I was going to do a 7-note or minor scale, if I start on A, it would sound like that. Now again, that's one of the first kind of shapes people learn. They might not always learn it here on fret 5. You might learn it over here on the E or on whatever, or people might move that around as one of the first things that they kind of know how to move that basic shape around. But what we want to do is use those same notes over the whole fretboard, which means we're basically in, you can think of it, the key of C major, but the same notes are in all of the other modes, including the related minor or Aeolian mode, the 6th mode related to the major scale. And so that's going to be an A minor for us. So A minor, very common key to play in on the guitar, in part because you've got this nice open A here, which is very nice as well. So we're going to be looking at that mode. Now when we do our shapes, remember that you can remember your shapes by just trying to memorize each of the shapes. And as you do that, I would suspect that we want to learn the shape and then also be able to realize that that shape is covering multiple modes. That's the easiest way to do it. So instead of saying, oh, I'm going to memorize 150 different scale shapes as though they're not related at all, that's craziness. Why would you do that unless you're just practicing some tremendous feat of memory, when the reality is that they are all related? Your purpose, the goal here is to try to see how they're all linked together, how they have kind of a fractal relationship together, and the more ways that you can link them, the better you know it. That's the definition to me of how well do you know the stuff. How many different ways can you basically look at it would be the general idea. So if I know this shape, I can see it not only as, the A minor or C major, but all of the related modes would be the general idea. We can also learn the scales by counting up what we call the formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, and so on, which you usually learn from the C scale. That's a little bit more difficult to do on the guitar, although a worthwhile practice, and one we might, focus in more on later. In part difficult on the guitar though, because you have to go not in a linear progression, but from string to string. I don't really want to know the pattern just on one string. I want to be able to move the pattern down. And a lot of people don't really understand, the distance when they start moving down strings, which is something we want to learn, because if we do understand that, it's a lot easier to do this stuff. And then we can also do it by basically intervals, meaning we're going to be measuring around a particular note in the scale. So in this case, we're going to be measuring around the A note. The shape that we're going to create is the same, but if we measure it from A as the focal point as opposed to C as the focal point, we will come up with a different bunch of intervals to create the same shape. And that's really useful because that helps us with our chord constructions. That helps us to build the shape anywhere we want to basically build the shape. So that's the general idea. So we started with the Ionian or major scale. Now we're looking at the Aeolian. Now the Aeolian is the 6th of the related major scale. We often in Western music use the major scale as our key. So I'm going to use absolute numbering system for the modes. Ionian or major scale number 1, Dorian number 2, Phrygian number 3, Lydian number 4, Mixolydian number 5, Aeolian number 6, and Locrian number 7. If you can see the Roman numerals, that will also help us to determine if it's a major mode or minor mode, but we often learn it just in terms of with relation to the major scale. We know that the 1-4-5, if you think about a standard blues progression, if you're playing in major, the 1-4-5 are the majors, and then the 2-3-6, if you play a minor blues, are, you know, the minors, or, you know, if you can convert to the minor scale, in case it would be the 1-4-5 related to the Aeolian, but we'll see that in a second here. But that's going to be the idea. So we want to learn first the major scale in terms of intervals, and then the minor scale typically, because that's the second most useful. And then all other modes we can compare to these two main modes, the main major and the main minor. So the Dorian and the Phrygian, we can compare to the Aeolian, and they will only have one interval difference. And then we can compare the Lydian and the Mixolydian to the Ionian or major scale, and they will only have one interval difference. And then the Locrian is a weird one. It's like kind of like the minor with a flat 5, which we might spend some time on itself in future presentations. So that's the general idea. So let's compare the major to the main minor here. So the major intervals are a 0 note away perfect first, 2 note away major second, 4 note away major third, 5 note away perfect fourth. Now remember, the perfects are typically going to be the same for the main major scale and the main minor Aeolian, and the 7 note away perfect fifth is also going to be the same for the minor scale, the 9 note away major 6, and the 11 note away major 7. Therefore, what would we expect to happen on the main minor? You would expect the perfects to remain the same and all of the majors to convert to minors. How do we convert from a major to a minor? We drop it down a step. We flatten it, you could say, terminology wise. Now, we do that for everyone except for the main minor, the minor second. So the minor second for the main minor, which is the minor scale, the 6th mode, Aeolian mode, as it relates to the major scale, for some reason still has a 2 note away major second. That's kind of funny because there is a minor scale where you do flatten all the majors to the minor, and we call that the Phrygian mode. So for some reason, the Phrygian mode is not the main minor. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I'm guessing that it was possibly because people liked the Aeolian minor scale better than the Phrygian, therefore it's like the second most popular, not exactly the opposite scale of the major scale. Or it might be that the Aeolian is actually, if I compare the other two modes to it, the Aeolian works well because there's only one difference in terms of the intervals between the Dorian and the Phrygian and the Aeolian. Whereas if I used the Phrygian, then it might turn out that when I compare the Dorian and Aeolian to the Phrygian, I might have to do two changes to the interval differences. So maybe that's why it is, but whatever, it is what it is. So we have to remember that we're just going to take all of these intervals, make all the majors minors by flattening the distance 1/2 step, except for the second, which remains the same for the main minor, the Aeolian, the minor scale. Let's go down to that minor scale. So here we have it. So now we've just saying, I'm still going to call it absolute number 6 mode, Aeolian mode, or the minor scale is the 6th of the related major scale, which was an A in our case, is the related minor to the C major. And so now we've made it the 1. So if we look at our intervals, then we've got a perfect first, because obviously it is what it is. And then we have that 2 note away major second, this 2 representing the second position now, this 2 representing the distance, which is 2 notes. We have a 3 note away minor third, as we would expect, because it was a 4 note away major third on the main major scale, and now on the main minor, the Aeolian, the minor scale, it's a minor third, which means that it's 3 notes away instead of 4. And then we have a 5 note away perfect fourth, so the fourth is the 4th position, 5 notes away is the distance. It's the same as it was in the main major. That's what we would expect because it's perfect. And then we have the perfect fifth, 7 note away perfect fifth, fifth representing the fifth position. 7 is the total distance in half steps or notes. And then we have the sixth, which is a minor sixth, 8 note away minor sixth, which is what we would expect because the major has a 9 note away major sixth, and we flatten it to an 8 note away minor sixth. And then we have the seventh, which is going to be a 10 note away minor seventh, which is what we would expect because the main major had an 11 note away major seventh, and we flatten it to a 10 note away minor 7. So that's how we want. So notice there's quite a few differences, but they're somewhat predictable because we can just flatten the major intervals to the minor. And once again, once we understand the major scale and the minor scale, all of the other modes are pretty easy because all I have to do is figure out one interval difference between the main major and the main minor. In other words, once I know these intervals, then I can convert to the Dorian and Phrygian pretty easily because the Dorian and Phrygian are only going to have one interval difference from the main minor Aeolian or minor scale, which is nice. So that allows me then also to maneuver from possibly this shape. Like if I want to maneuver out of this shape and say, how can I then visualize another shape? Well, you could move the whole shape up like you're thinking of it as a spreadsheet, because it's a spreadsheet, and you can just move everything, all the relative positions move up. That's difficult to finger. So I'm not saying I'm not even saying that I'm practicing too here. I'm not saying that I can just, I see the shape here, I'll just shift the whole thing up in my mind. Your muscle memory doesn't work that way, even though copying and pasting it in an Excel worksheet does work that way. So me as an accountant, conceptually, that makes perfect sense. I can copy and paste it and see exactly what is happening. Can I get my fingers to memorize that this position is the same as this position if I move it down? That's a lot more difficult, but it's a lot easier to do if you realize that the shape is moving instead of just trying to remember a whole nother scale shape as though it's not related at all is kind of part of the point. But where was I going with this? I was going with the idea that you could also do it by saying, well, what if I just look at the Dorian here, which is just the same shape, and I just try to center around the D, and then I want to go from the Dorian to a D minor. Well, then if I know that there's only one interval difference between the Dorian and the main minor, then I can just target that one note that's going to be different, the one interval difference between the Dorian and the minor, and then I can visualize my same shape in essence, but just then tweak that one interval. That's just another way that you might pick up seeing it, where you can kind of work on the same thing. Or the Phrygian is going to have one interval difference. That's the one that has the one note away minor second. So if I know E Phrygian, because I'm used to playing in A minor or C major, and therefore if I just target the E, then I'm in E Phrygian, and then I'm like, well, I want to go from E Phrygian possibly to E minor, because it's a minor mode. That should be a pretty easy change. There's only one interval difference. I just say, well, that second has a flat second. I'm going to make it a 2 note away major second, and I can see the same shape and then just target that note and push it out one, and then I can kind of visualize the shape that way. Now, once you start doing that, you'll start saying, hey, look, the shape is a different shape just by pushing out that one note, and then you can start memorizing the shape. And then, of course, you can go from there and say, well, now that I'm in the D or like the E minor, what are the related modes, all the other 6 related modes to that E minor? And what are the 6 related modes to the D minor? So that's just one way that you can kind of expand. All right. So that makes perfect, hopefully that makes sense.